like to bring the Corporate Governance Committee meeting to order. I understand we have a public speaker.
Yes, Mr. Zhang.
Mr. Zhang? Come on, close.
Hello, good afternoon to Cho Loda.
Hello.
My name is Kevin Zhang. I would like to request that the MTA bring back the B23 bus along 16th Avenue and Cocodial Road and extend along Beverly Road, Brooklyn Avenue, and Linden Boulevard because B23 bus terminate at Flatbush Avenue and Cocodial Road, waiting for the B23 bus every 20 to 30 minutes. B23 bus was discontinued due to low ridership in June 2010, service cuts, and I can walk Transfer Street from 62nd Street and UU Trade Avenue on the DNN train station to Cocodial Road on the Q train station due to the cold weather. I can walk from Flatbush Avenue and Cocodial Road to Beverly Road on the 2 and 5 train station due to the cold weather. B23 bus will be restored along 16th Avenue and Cocodial Road between Dow Hill Road and Flatbush Avenue and extend along Beverly Road between Flatbush Avenue and Brooklyn Avenue, Brooklyn Avenue between Beverly Road and Linden Boulevard, and Linden Boulevard between Brooklyn Avenue and Pennsylvania Avenue on weekdays and weekends in both directions. If the B23 bus restore, so I could take the B23 bus from 62nd Street and UU Trade Avenue station to Cocodial Road station to go home so I don't want to get sick and catch a cold. Approximately 1,580 weekdays customers and 1,240 weekends customers will be required to use the B8 or B16 bus. A typical customer's trip would increase by 15 minutes. That's why the B23 bus got a low ridership because I can't walk in the cold weather along 16th Avenue, and when I got sick, the B23 bus was never restored. Thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Even better. So earlier today, before we get into the approval of minutes and the committee work plan, what I wanted to do and ask the board members is that we should have a broad-ranging discussion. We don't have to approve anything. The city members have put together a document, which I don't know if they've shared with the members. Good, okay. And then I understand some other members have some other comments and questions that they may have. And I've just found out we also don't have a quorum, which doesn't change what I wanted to propose. It only solidifies it. So what I do is let's have a robust discussion. Let's talk about all the things we want to do. Let's plan on having a meeting in January. I'll find a way to change the order of the meeting so that it's not the last meeting of the day. So, and proceed. So with that, there are a couple of things we need to do procedurally. We have to approve the minutes, listen to the work plan, which will all take a few seconds. We do have one item that's statutorily that we have to pass, and that's review and approve the procurement guidelines. That doesn't prohibit us from changing the procurement guidelines in January in the future, but I don't think that is as need for change like the bylaws or the guidelines. And with that, let me, well, I can't approve the minutes because we don't have a quorum, so assume, we'll do that at the very next meeting. Draft committee, Lamont?
Okay.
Work plan?
Work plan, yes. As you'll see on item number 3 on the agenda, we have proposed a 2018 draft committee work plan. It is substantially similar to prior work plans, so we are not making any recommended changes moving forward for 2018. Any questions? Good. Also, you'll note on the agenda there are several items that we are required to bring to the board for review. They are not items that are voted upon, but we are required to bring them for your review. Those including the MTA Code of Ethics, which is item number 8, item number 7, whistleblower policy, the governance guidelines and MTA bylaws. Again, there is no vote being asked of you today, but we are bringing them to your attention, and the staff is not recommending any changes at this time. Number 10. Yes. We're ready for item number 10, which is a review and approval of the MTA procurement guidelines. Each year we bring to the board the MTA procurement guidelines. We are not recommending any changes at this time, but they do require your review and approval. You can find that with staff summary on page 172.
This will go straight to the board on Wednesday.
Before we do that, are there any questions from the members?
Yes.
Well, actually, Neil, you raised a question at the last meeting about why we double track things.
I think you had stepped. That's actually an interesting question. Carl was a bit incredulous, and rightfully so, that he had not seen the walk-in on Metro North's ESI package. But the Metro North Committee, of course, has not only been talking about it for months, but I think we were all very comfortable being walked in because we had seen it over the weekend. Except we are in parallel, and I guess I don't really understand why the operating committee, in this case Metro North, looks at the same document and has to also approve that then finance has to approve. And so obviously anything with money, I guess, under that theory was that anything with money has to go to the finance committee. So I think we have to figure out whether that actually is a necessary step or whether finance actually only has to be involved in a subset of activities.
Okay.
We don't have to answer these issues right now.
Item number 1 under the city's plan, if I recall, was to get books and information out in a more reasonable period of time. And so let's start talking about what we need to do, because we don't have a system here like they have in the state and in other places where you get a message of necessity, which means an item can be voted on within a relatively short period of time.
This is not an issue of timeliness. This is an issue of, forget the walk-in nature of it.
So I think I heard...
Oh, you want to know why it goes to both committees?
I think that's the point.
I asked that 5 years ago. I didn't get a satisfactory answer.
Aren't you the boss?
I didn't get a satisfactory answer either.
In the Finance Committee charter, there would be the opportunity in reviewing that charter to make certain changes. And there are maybe 14 separate items that by charter come to the Finance Committee, and the question would be whether or not we wanted to look at that section and make some proposals or amendments.
By the way, I don't have a problem with financing things. But we've raised this a couple of times.
But why the belts and suspenders?
Was that?
Why belts and suspenders?
Right, exactly.
Yes, Norman.
Yeah, could all you guys at the other end of the table, it's a big table, can you speak louder? I mean,
Sure.
I spent many years in the machine shop. I really don't hear that good. I should wear a hearing aid, but I'm too vain.
And everybody's to my left, which is normal, but anyway, we have room over here too if anybody wants to move on this side. Does the city want to, any representative of the city want to go through line by line? And I understand, Neil, you have some questions as well. So, and any other members that have questions? Jamie, you have some? So. I do.
I don't know if I want to go line by line. Everyone could look, but I see one tension we're now having in the board meetings and the committee meetings. They're running so long now, and yet I still think some of what we're doing in them we probably don't need to do. I really don't need the report on the utilization of Easy Pass unless it's really something weird is happening. So I know it's easier said than done. And I also know that, Joe, to be fair to you, you tried to propose we stretch the committee meetings out over 2 days, and everybody didn't like that idea very much. But I think governance is a super important topic, so maybe it actually merits its own day, because it's true we've lost the quorum given everyone's been here, and it's now 4 in the afternoon. We do all have day jobs. You know, I think quite simply, and I think, you know, some of this, it's been fun. I've been in this board for a while, but it's been fun having a new board member, Carl, come in with fresh eyes as someone who ran the City Planning Commission and get his take on how, you know, unusual our board governance structure is, to put it mildly. So I think we made some basic requests on some transparency things, and I think, Joe, some of those I think you've done a better job of getting us some of the board materials, which we're all appreciative of. But you know, I'm still frustrated by the fact that board members can't put items on the agenda, we can't ask for hearings, we have no say in any personnel decisions. We typically read about them in the New York Times. That's where I read about them. Maybe they're in other papers too. We read about major appointments in the New York Times. I've never been on a board, and I've been on a few and chaired a few, where there wasn't some kind of discussion with the board members before major personnel decisions were made. And the board members had some opportunity to weigh in, even perhaps interview the individuals in question. Now, in one, I think we have Jamie here. You know, he's already started this process in the audit committee, but I think, you know, a lot of us feel like we need some guidance from independent counsel. I would say particularly, you know, it's no secret that there have now been a bunch of complaints lodged with the authority's budget office, that the board is, you know, some of what we're doing is improper or whatever, including that board members, including an allegation that board members themselves are failing to meet their fiduciary duties, which I think all of us who are board members find very troubling, because I think everyone here takes the role very seriously. And I think sometimes we feel we're hampered by the lack of information. So, I mean, I'll sort of put all those on the table. I'll also put one in our letter that's New York City specific. And I don't even want it to be me necessarily. Maybe this is one Veronica can talk about, the New York City Transit Committee.
That was my cue. If we've discussed over a period of months having a vice chair for the transit committee, and then my colleague, Commissioner Weisbrod, suggested that that chair be someone from the city's representatives on the board. And as far as I know, there hasn't been someone in quite some time who's vice chaired from the city's representatives, the transit committee. And it's not, I think the clarification was made in some discussions that it's not in the statute, but it is in the bylaws. And we would like to ensure that that position is indeed named.
Well, I would just add, no mayoral appointee chairs any committee at the moment, and I think hasn't done so for a number of years. Which,
Give him audit, Joe.
Yeah. I don't think he's, actually, Jamie, now he might want to give it to us.
That's a good trade.
I don't know. You know, I would also include with sort of a bigger thought for, we're lucky, we have much of the leadership of the MTA here today. You know, we've had a lot of disputes about who controls what, but I genuinely think that more transparency would be of benefit to all of you. I think the public and all the watchdogs and advocates and other groups out there, I think mostly they bring a lot of good ideas and suggestions to the table. It doesn't mean we follow them all, but I think they enrich the debate about the future of this incredible agency. And, you know, in addition, I think, to the frustration I feel as a board member of not having good information, I also think the public, journalists, et cetera, need more timely access to what this agency is doing. I think it will be to the benefit of all of us. I truly do.
One thing I'd like to, what are some examples of the transparency that may not, you know, that if it's included in your letter, so be it. I get it. Don't have to repeat it, but.
I mean, you know, the class example, right, the one that I think caused a lot of consternation in the board, it predates you, was, I think now 3 capital plan amendments ago. You know, there was a 150-page document that I think we got the Friday before the board meeting. The journalists got it when they walked in the door on Monday. And the public, I don't even know when it went online. You know, and it was a really important document. And if you go back and look at some of the things in there, you know, a lot of important decisions were being made. And you know, I know that it's hard to produce the up-to-date documents way in advance of the board meetings. I recognize there's lots happening and that's difficult for staff. But, you know, I still think posting more of this stuff publicly sooner would be a good thing to do.
I agree with you. As you said, I wasn't here at the time, but bringing something as important as a 5-year plan or a change to the 5-year plan is worthy of aging and worthy of everybody reading it. Same as we do with the budget, a month ahead of time, send it out, discuss it, all of that. I think that's a fair request.
And I just think it's no secret the board, things have grown pretty fractious, and I think that's in part, look, there's some real substantive things we're fighting about, which it's probably right we fight, because they're important. I think they're important things that probably need some fighting. But I think there's also just a frustration that, you know, we're trying to sort of debate these tough issues and we don't have all the information we need. I mean, I still find the board, I remember, Lamont, first when I still find getting hundreds and hundreds of pages of board materials, which still aren't even all loaded up on the website in the same direction, so everyone's flipping their iPads trying to read these charts. You know, I still, it's a pet peeve of mine because I see us all sitting there going like this. It's kind of funny. I still wish that we could get a manageable amount of information that really pointed out the key issues, sort of the highline issues that the board needs to focus on. I know that's not easy to do. I get that. But I just think we would have a better debate, a more sensible discussion, less frustration if we could do that.
Right. You know, the materials are voluminous and it takes a lot of time. And I'm just wondering about how do we satisfy the need of the board who is desirous of doing a lot, you know, how do we give them the information, but then what I'm hearing might be, well, we could debate this, but you could have a summary up front, but then if the summary doesn't include something that a board member thinks is very important, then the argument can be made that we're covering up. So I worry.
No, I mean, look, I think this is not an easy thing to do, but I think we ought to. I mean,
we ought to try.
You know, I have to guess. When I walked in the door as DOT commissioner, it had been the custom in my agency that every division wrote a weekly memo that stretched on for pages and pages. So every week, I walked out of the door on Friday with like 400 pages of, you know, half of it just not stuff that I needed to worry about, and then really important nuggets buried in the 400 pages, which I couldn't even figure out. It just, you know, and I first sort of said, I don't want these anymore, and everyone flipped out, because that's sort of been the way they were doing things. But we kind of worked out a better system where we filtered up the thing, and I agree, with this board we're a little all over the place. I mean, frankly, when you get that much material, it makes you a little all over, and there's this 1 million thing I'm going to go on about. So I'm not saying it's easy, but I really think it would be worth our while, and particularly now as these board meetings are growing longer and more contentious, to try and get some collective understanding. What are we going to kill our time on $1 million procurement, or are we going to, you know, kill our time on the big picture capital plan?
Agreed. I'll address that in some kind of a document to everybody for the next January meeting. I think Jamie first. Then
go ahead.
Okay.
So, for my list, and I'm sure we're not going to work through all these things today, but just to get on there, the personnel issue is one that I also share concerns about sort of when you hear about them and how they're made. And, you know, I think it may be partly an education process, in that my reading of some of the governing documents, in fact, give pretty broad latitude to the chair, CEO, to go make those decisions. So it may just be information more than us having a say in it, frankly. But that's certainly a concern that I have. But that goes to, I don't think I ever got, when I joined this board, and I've kind of had to cobble together from the web, and maybe I've never actually asked, a sort of concise set of documents that are the governing documents, from statute to, there's a good governance document out there on the web, there's committee charters, there's bylaws. You can kind of find them on our website, but then after you've put them all together, and I think I have a complete set, the hierarchy has not, if it's been decided by the board, I don't know what it is. And as a number of people know,
Jamie, that's a board briefing book, and I'm surprised you didn't get it. Lamont, do you know?
Yes, that's usually given out during the corporate governance training or during your orientation. It's a big, thick 3-ring binder.
I don't think I ever got that book, but even if I did, bringing the next problem is in there, which I'm happy to, I would like to get that, because I've gone online and now pulled it all together.
Right.
I got ethics policies, but I don't think I ever got bylaws and committee charters, and
Yeah. But I'd be more than happy to give it
That
to
would be
you
great.
again.
But then maybe somebody can answer this for me. Has the board adopted a order of precedence of the good governance document and the committee charters? Because there's a good governance document that was adopted in the same month and year as at least the committee charters that are online, and this issue,
Oh, I'm sorry, good governance document.
it's on our website.
Governance guidelines.
Oh, the governance
Good
guidelines.
Good governance guidelines.
Oh,
Yeah. So in there, and this gets to the issue that I find myself having gotten in around hiring Cravath, there's statements in there that say to the effect of the board can hire attorneys, accountants, and consultants at any time. The committee charter says it can do so with either approval of a majority of the board or the chair. How is a board member to know which of those?
The charter has supremacy over the guidelines.
And that because, I mean, where does that set out?
We'll get in the answer.
Okay. And
okay.
The charter voted on the guidelines.
Actually, okay.
document.
Yeah. Okay, well,
okay, but then outside of committee, a board member should be able to hire an
Okay.
attorney at any time, right? So that seems to me it needs cleaning up, at least, and the board should make some conscious decision. For me, it leads into this issue of the ability to use attorneys, consultants, or accountants at any time, which I think a board member should be able to do as long as it's related to the business of the MTA.
okay, can I just jump in here for a second?
Sure.
I guess I'm probably been here the longest. Okay. So first of all, let me take some blame because most of the documents you're referring to, I had some part or were the author of to some extent or another. So the guidelines are, again, a very high level. The charters are the mechanism by which, the procedures by which we implement the recommendations or the requirements within those guidelines. So you have the guidelines, very broad umbrella. Charters are a mechanism by which those guidelines are implemented. And that's the way initially we had, foreseen this working. So you take that from that perspective, charters govern how that process moves forward. The guidelines are a much broader document.
Well, so whether it's, regardless, I go back to this issue of attorneys, consultants. I think you live as a board member both inside of a committee and then you live at a higher plane that isn't committee specific, right? And I presume that the good governance document is applicable to you as a board member at all times, and then in your committee activities, the committee charter applies. From what I experienced, it doesn't seem to be the case, right? In that I went and I directed attorneys, hired attorneys with however that happened. But I think there needs to be.
You're not accepting our interpretation. You're accepting your own. That the guidelines are more important than the charter. The charter, which is voted on by the members, and the guidelines are not inclusive of everything that's in the charter, and are broad-ranging. It's not. It has no supremacy over it.
Okay, I would have no way of knowing the guidelines weren't adopted by the board. I presume they were, because there's an adoption date on them. So I presume they were adopted by the board, too.
Yes.
Okay, so.
Okay. I stand corrected.
So, in either case, it's an issue for me that needs resolution. I think the board should have, is entitled to, and many boards do have an ability to consult with independent professionals without having to go get a majority of the board to approve it or the chair to approve it. And you particularly want that because you don't want to have to come back and get that when even a minority disagrees with their fellow board members. They should be able to go consult with independent experts to vet their thoughts, positions, and concerns without having to go make a motion or come to the chair.
Are you asking for that, just my clarification, are you asking for that as a committee?
No.
Right, or any board member?
I think the board should have available to it on an ongoing basis outside independent experts to consult with as related, obviously, to,
Outside of a specific committee.
yes.
So if,
Not every issue perfectly fits into the committee structure.
well, we could debate that. I don't know. I haven't run through them.
As a for instance, when these allegations are made by the authorities, to the authority's budget office, and they say we're not living up to our fiduciary obligations and we have questions about it, I don't think the only resource we should have is in-house counsel, no disrespect to it, of the MTA. You know, there's questions that I have that I think I would be curious the answers to from independent experts, as one example.
So if you came to me as you did on the issue regarding order, or whatever it was, an upstate ski thing, I automatically gave you permission. If you came to me and asked me if you wanted counsel related to the authority board, I'd give it to you. In a second, as I told you on the phone the other day, I would have given it to you for a lot of things.
And
You just didn't ask.
I'll take it at its face that if I had come to you and said, Joe, my disagreement is now with what you and management are doing, you would give that authority. That's the concern. And by the way, someday it won't be you, right? And so the next person may not have that willingness. So I think as a governance matter, to make that available to the board is a relevant thing to think about. And then my final thing is,
One other thing on the legal that I would encourage the board to take advantage of. There is in fact an independent inspector general for the MTA who, if you have issues and questions, use the inspector general as well, who is a former prosecutor who has a complete staff, and I'm sure he'd be more than happy to assist.
fair enough, but it's still a thing I think in conjunction with that we should consider. And my final thing from a governance standpoint is I have concerns about, I think that those who do our collective bargaining should be able to be insulated from any outside pressures or considerations, and let me leave it at that. And I think that historically, there may be some instances where that hasn't been the case, and it's not fair to the people who negotiate for us, for the MTA.
You're right when you say historically. It's been done since the MTA was created because of pattern bargaining, and the need to maintain pattern bargaining, whether it's at the city level. Whether it's a city level or state level. So that I can let the folks in the city talk about pattern bargaining and what it means, but I think that gets to be difficult because we have to deal within the pattern that's created.
I guess I'll just say from the city point of view, I mean, there's some similarities in the labor negotiations, but in the city, we don't have a board that then votes on them. I mean, the mayor sort of authorized, and if you don't like the mayor and you think he's done a bad job on the labor negotiations, you can vote him out. But I guess here the weird thing is we have to vote on them, and I think...
I mean, that's my concern is I don't want to get into any specific instance, but I think if we could do that, it would be very, I suspect, de-stressing to those who represent us, actually, and would alleviate questions in my head, and I suspect some other board members sometimes about, did this get done in isolation? Was there, and I'll leave it at that because it's, probably enough said.
Can I just say,
first, then off to Ron.
so as Polly said, as you know, Joe, I also chaired a board that had many different appointees from many different places who were not, where the appointing authorities were not necessarily collegial, but the board was collegial, and even though they sometimes surely disagreed and voted differently, but there's a lot of, we shouldn't have to read about, one of the things that I'm shocked at here is that all too often we're reading about major events at the MTA in the press. We get no advance warning of them, it often seems like we're the last ones to know about it, instead of getting a heads up about there's a press article coming out. We hear about documents floating around that the press gets or the press is aware of that we're not aware of, and that creates, to me, an adversarial relationship between management and the board. I mean, it's almost inescapable that somehow things are being hidden from us, and that's not a good dynamic. I mean, I think, want to have a lot of faith and trust in management that it is going to come to us surely with recommendations, but also the strengths and weaknesses of a particular proposal, instead of, here's what we want to do, this is the only way to do it. And I'm not saying that that's exactly what they say, but that's how it comes across. And so it creates this sense of antagonism and suspicion that really infects I think, the board.
Okay. No, we have Veronica's next, then Norman.
Just a complimentary point to something Jamie said with regards to the Office of the General Counsel. I would like a better understanding of the role of the Office of the General Counsel and how it relates to advocacy or not, or independence from the board. And I'll try to give an example. It may be difficult for the Office of the General Counsel to serve in a position of neutrality on certain issues that have certainly come before the board over the past few months, just because of the structure of this agency. And it'd be nice to know and understand better how that office is to better serve the board and how that office is to better serve the agency. And if those are even roles, perhaps those are not roles. But I think my larger point is what, and this is more a rhetorical question, what legal counsel can we as board members rely upon that we feel confident in its objectivity and neutrality? Again, no disrespect to any of the people who have held this position nor have it now, but there have been some concerns about that level of objectivity, not based on the person holding the position, but again, based on the structure of the agency and the office. The next question that I just have is in response to what you said, Joe, about the Inspector General. Can you remind me, please, or someone please remind me, how that office is funded and who appoints the Inspector General?
It's funded by, I believe, the Assembly, it's specifically, and the appointment is made by the Governor's office, the Governor. This guy, the fellow that's in there has been there, Barry Kluger, going back to the 80s. Yeah, I can't remember who originally appointed.
That. So.
But I hear what you're saying about counsel to advise you in, point counterpoint type situation. I get that, but I also encourage you to go to the Inspector General for other things that aren't necessarily contentious. But, Norman, then Susan, then Mitch.
I found if you hang around these committee meetings long enough, sooner or later somebody brings up a topic you think you know something about. So we reached that point here. I don't really understand Jamie's point on collective bargaining and outside influences. The last round that was settled by patterns going in two different directions, chiefly a presidential emergency board on the Long Island Railroad, which was a federal level negotiations, which the negotiations had been stalled for 5 years because the state insisted on a pattern from upstate CSEA, which we did not consider a pattern, but ultimately a presidential emergency board decided in our favors. Well, before we could settle, TWU went in and did a deal based on what they wanted to do. So at that point, we had to balance the needs of the Presidential Emergency Board against what TWU did, and we wrapped up some deal that was somewhere in between, and we all walked away. It's a difficult thing. It's like landing an airplane. Every time you land the airplane, you're glad you landed the airplane. And that's what collective bargaining is like. Now, when you meet outside influences, I don't really know how that appears in that world. I know what it means for me to ratify an agreement with my members, but if it's been through a Presidential Emergency Board and we've made an agreement to settle that Presidential Emergency Board, with Congress's approval, Congress can intervene at any point once that major dispute has been declared. Then what's the board going to do? You don't like to have a gun held to your head, but neither does anybody else, neither do the commuters and neither do the workers. And I just don't really know what you mean about outside influence. Now, I got more to say on the government stuff, but I'll leave it at that. And like I said, it's a pattern is what people perceive a pattern to be. And the Presidential Emergency Board, if you'd read it, you would find that it was based on very clear labor market conditions, private sector settlements throughout the country from Class 1 railroads. Maybe you don't think that's irrelevant. Maybe you want to settle it on people picking up trash upstate. That's what the governor wanted to do. Well, we didn't do that. And that's not the way it's going to be settled.
Well, I was...
Oops, go ahead.
Let Jamie answer. And then
Yeah. I was talking about specific experiences, precede you, Joe, being here, where there was a contract element that I was confused by, and why we were including it. And you mentioned the governor, where the answer was there was pressures to include that element, and it unnerved me, quite frankly. I don't think that that's a good reason, or at least we should know that as we sit in executive session when we have a bargaining agreement in front of us, that let's call it request is there.
Separately, since I wasn't here, separately, away from this, just whatever that, let's discuss whatever that element was so I can get a better feel for what
Yeah, that's fine.
we're talking about.
Yep.
It's getting elliptical. Okay. Susan.
This is the first I've had an opportunity to look at your resolution, but my quick read, there are a number of items that I completely agree with and some that I'd like more clarification on. With respect to your comment that you will come back to the board with some suggestions as to how to proceed, I think you should prioritize those issues that we feel argumentative about, because they really fall into a couple of categories. They're usually involving money. When it's a money issue, we need enough information to be able to make the decision, and that's true whether it's our budgets or it's you're asking us to spend money. And then I think we all have a lot of confusion, and we've had a number of discussions amongst ourselves about the various governance issues. I agree with the comment that this might take longer than one meeting, but my understanding from Le Monde and past practice is that we can make changes to charters and guidelines throughout the year if it takes us a month or two to get where we need to be. It seems to me that many of our discussions are revolving around what our general counsel can provide, what the inspector general provides, and what we feel we need. I think, to summarize it, if it's something that can get us named in a court case, if the buck stops with us, with our vote that we took, we should have the right as a board to hire whoever we feel comfortable with, who's outside of management, outside of the organization, to give us the confidence that we are making the right decisions. So I think many of these questions do fall into that category. But I also will tell you that I'm going to have to leave because I don't have a lot of options for getting home. And they're closing off as I sit here. So I I hope to be able to continue this. Sadly, I will not be at the board meeting, so I will not be able to weigh in there, but I'm hoping this
won't come
will...
up at the board meeting,
Okay.
But I will, as I said, draft something and get it to everybody before the next meeting, and maybe it'll settle some issues, or maybe it'll continue the debate, but I agree. As Carl has said, I think the board is fractured, and we need to find a way to heal it. So let's begin this process.
I agree with Susan that there are many things in this letter that I think I would agree with, a couple that I would to discuss, but two things that I have always been concerned about is, number one, the ability of the board to put items on an agenda on its own, as opposed to having to wait for staff to do so. Now, that doesn't mean they pass. I'm not arguing they should or shouldn't pass, but I think it's always important for the board or a committee of the board or something to have some process to bring something to the board for discussion itself, as opposed to the operating committee, because we all understand the difference between Monday and Wednesday, and that's a significant difference both in the perception of the public and how things are decided. And the second issue that I've grave concerns about is, and this is I think something because of the way what we do. If I was on a separate board, I wouldn't be as concerned about it, but because what we do and the agencies are so dependent upon how we operate and the standards under which we operate and under which they operate, whether those are maintenance standards or operating standards or things like that, those should be set by the board and only changed by the board. They should not be at the discretion of the head of the operating agency or whatever. In a perfect example, I mean, we all read the New York Times article about MTA did this and MTA did that, and somebody said to me, well, when did you do that? And I said, well, the next time I do it will be the first time I do it, because I've never voted on MTA maintenance standards or MTA operating standards, other than included in a budget, which is not really the way to do that. And I think those, because they're so important to us and how our agencies operate, if we're going to decide to change, the inspection standard for a subway car from 50,000 miles to 30,000 miles, that has ramifications. We should make that decision. Or changing it from 50,000 miles to 100,000 miles. We should make that decision because it has ramifications above and beyond the car itself. It has ramifications as to how we operate. So that's of great concern to me, that I think it would be much better if we did them. I have no problem with the head of the agency recommending them, but I think there should be a discussion about them, and we should approve them.
Fair enough. One of the things that, and I fully agree that board members can ask questions, can add things to agendas. I would encourage everybody to, in the very beginning of all the committee meetings, we have a work schedule, and it goes through what's going to be presented the next month and the next month. Add to it. Add things to it, because you're asked at the very end of that, do you have any comments or questions? And in the short time I've been back, the answer is there's been nobody who's ever added anything to it. But I would add to that, but I'd also, bring it up at the floor. I guess I know why when I put at the bottom of this agenda, other business, there was questions asked. Right. What does that mean? I said, I want to have a discussion. I mean, which is, part of it. So yeah, I'm amenable to that, but I think it exists already. I have to think about the metrics, because at what point how far down do we go, and how far up?
There's a level at which the board should set it, and then there's a level at which the operating agency. I'm not sure if you're differentiating.
Understand. Neil.
Couple things. I've actually been surprised since I've been on this board that none of our meeting agendas ever have new business. I've been on enough boards and other places where that's a standard of old business, new business. We actually have never had that. So and let's maybe as a matter of course, because it's sort of fascinating, there is no moment for that. One point I want to make, so I work with a lot of companies, especially media companies, and it's fascinating how growth cures all kinds of tensions. The reason why Google was such a fun place to work is it grows at 25% a year. All that revenue growth leads to a lot of people having a good time. We have the opposite problem, which is we have a shrinking situation budget-wise, and budget shrinkage causes the kind of fractured issues that Polly is talking about. That's not just ego, that's money's issue. So, and I wouldn't go as far as what Carl said about, so I have two topics I want to raise for governance. One is I wouldn't go as far as Carl says that I have mistrust related to the appointments, but it is definitely one that causes questions. And Pat, I'll invoke your appointment. I've said this to our chair a few times. We heard about your appointment 35 minutes after the press release went out. An email went out to us 35 minutes after I got an MTA alert as a general member of the public saying you've been appointed. And your title, as you know, is not an obvious title of what your role was. We have a lot of new roles and new titles, managing directors, presidents, COOs, and that sort of almost Franklin Delano Roosevelt level of alphabet soup of titles and names like this is the New Deal is confusing when we don't know the people, we don't know what their role is, and as you guys know, in the last several weeks, you know, Phil Eng's role has changed multiple times, Tim's has changed multiple times. We've had 4 heads of bridges and tunnels in the, within a 4-month period, I think, at one point. I couldn't keep track of who was in charge, and as a member of that committee, I didn't know until after it was decided. So I think there is a level of engagement, whether that's with the chair of the committee, and that person then is responsible for communicating. I realize there are a lot of influences on those choices. They're not just yours. I get that, and I applaud the need to move fast, but some involvement with us in that is necessary, because otherwise we don't look like we know what we're in charge of. That's point one. That's a real point. Point two is a much smaller point, which I'd ask, which I came through when I reviewed this. So if you wouldn't mind turning to page 7 of the corporate governance document. It says master page number 7, section 7, which is attendance at meetings. Any one or more members of the board or of a committee thereof may attend a meeting of such board or committee by means of a conference, telephone, or similar communications equipment allowing all to attend. However, it's not a
vote doesn't
count as a vote. As a man who travels a lot and can't attend everything, I would like to figure out how we can use technology, so at least if I can't be somewhere, I can participate telephonically. We've so far only said by matter of course we can only do it with briefings, but clearly this states we can do that with committee and board meetings.
Where, I believe it's statute, and I have to find it. That
Open
prohibits
meetings?
the open meetings law. That prohibits. I know of one state, an entity created by the state that allows for a high level of digital communication, and that is the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation. They had numerous, that is the only one I know. And 5 years ago I wanted that to become here, and it couldn't get out of the assembly.
Okay.
Never.
So it's a statute issue.
I'm all with you. It is a statute issue, and I think we should have the ability to do it. And one of the things that we need to do, and I remember having the discussions up in Albany, is that the public needs to be able to become part of the conference call. They may not be able to, they can hear, they just can't, very similar to an investor call where they can listen.
Understood.
And if they have questions, they can push buttons.
And in fact, I think I'm on the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation board, and their committees can, because they don't take votes and they don't have any actions actually at the committee level, are not subject to freedom of information or open meetings.
So there are committees. What do they do if they don't take action?
They make recommendations to the board, but they have no corporate authority to actually.
Yeah. We have committees that are set up by statute, so and some are, some aren't.
But the question is whether if they're actually acting on behalf of the enterprise, or whether they're just making recommendations to the full board. This goes back to the, to the Long Island Railroad and Metro North Committee that's recommending to the Finance Committee, which in turn is making a decision. So is that necessarily subject to open meetings?
Right. All good questions, and the initial one about why it has to go to 2 committees and all of that, I have to do research on to try to figure out one way or the other why that is and why it's necessary. Yes, Polly?
I just want to I want to go back to Neil's point number one, because I perhaps get that the most keenly, because I'll just tell you, I think I've never been on a board that didn't have some kind of either a permanent or ad hoc hiring committee that would be involved at some level in major hiring decisions. I mean, Joe, you've made a big point of saying New York City owns the subway system and we should step up. I read about Andy Byford in the New York Times. I never met the man. You know, I'm sure he's great. By all accounts, he sounds nifty. I called him up to say hello, but I didn't meet him. The mayor didn't meet him. No one in New York City had any input at all into that decision. We don't know who the other candidates were. I mean, I'm sure you chose the best one, but it's sort of, nor did anyone else on this board. And this is someone we all want to work with.
I need to look at the statute, because as I remember it, it gives the chair the right to make the appointments and all that stuff. What you're asking for is some input. I hear you. I find a way to do it.
About it in the paper as
Right, the way I read about Larry Reuter when I was deputy mayor, and I understand. I've been on both sides. I've been on your side, and I've been on this side. I get it.
But I think you want your board to be invested in your senior leadership team, and it's hard, you know, and feel like we know what's going on. When we read about all the stuff in the paper, right, and we get the announcement after the Times is reported on it, it sends the message, we really don't care what you think.
Well, to get a call from a reporter is even worse, saying, they just announced, what do you think? And you say,
Well, that's the I feel like an idiot moment, which
Right.
I don't want. Which at the end of the day, I hate
We all
that.
get that.
I hate
I
that.
get it all the time. So what do you think about this? And I said, what? What do you think about that? You know, whatever.
I'll give you some advice, which I never take either, but I should take it. Don't talk to reporters. But that's all right.
Doctor, it hurts when I do this. Don't do this.
Right.
Yeah, I got
right.
it.
I got it.
I mean, I have public appearances every week. I don't have the ability not to speak to reporters.
Well, maybe speaking to reporters, this does create some of the problems here, but the
Trying to be humorous.
the legalism here with the governance thing. I mean, you put together some good proposals here, but I suggested in legal changes, when you're depending on legal changes to overcome what is essence distrust among the parties, I wouldn't say it's a waste of time, but it's not going to accomplish what, in my opinion, what you want to achieve. As long as you don't trust the other party, you make all the legal changes you want. Now, some of these legal changes, to me, would enhance the trust among the parties. You know, you can call it transparency, whatever. It would enhance the trust between the parties. And some of the other ones just make it look like, oh, they've been jamming stuff down our throat. Well, you know, it's a big agency. They got to react in a timely fashion to changes that happen on the ground, and sometimes these time limits are put in here. I thought maybe they were a little bit, you know, if you think about it, maybe it won't be, but in the end, what I'm looking for is some way to break down the distrust between the parties, and people can say that's impossible. You got the big guy in Albany, you got the big guy in Gracie Mansion, and we can't break down the distrust between the parties. But for the good of the entire system, for the good of the commuters and the employees and the real estate people, the stakeholders, we have to break down the distrust between the parties. Make all the legal changes you want. It won't overcome, and I don't mean that against the lawyers in the room, but make all the legal changes you want. It won't overcome the distrust between the parties.
We can try. Be back to everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you. It's adjourned.